So Ann-Kristin is a professor of Norwegian as a second language. And Ann-Kristin works at the Department of Linguistic, Literary and Aesthetic Studies at the University of Bergen. And Ann-Kristin's research mostly focuses on Norwegian as a second language, which we also do in our book, but slightly different research. So Ann-Kristin has worked on various, investigated various linguistic aspects of Norwegian as a second language, focusing on morphology and syntax, for example, tense property. But she also has worked on investigated the role of different individual factors, for example, in the acquisition of Norwegian as a second language, so both from a linguistic and extra-linguistic perspective, and also she worked quite a lot on cross-linguistic influence in second language acquisition. And she recently published a very interesting paper, which I recommend, Who Succeeds and Who Fails, exploring the role of background variables in explaining the outcomes of L2 language tests. So this is the paper where the different factors are also in, background factors are in the picture. Ann-Kristin has worked with different populations, with children and adults, and today she will present data from her new project, which is extremely interesting and exciting and rather very, very novel. It uses a very novel approach. And also she's worked with different types of methodology, including corpus, oral and written narratives, and interviews. And Ann-Kristin has had another project, which I haven't actually asked about, which is called Norwegian in Academia, which abbreviation is NINJA. Yeah. Yeah, which investigates skills of employees, Norwegian skills of employees in academia in Norway. It's a very exciting topic. Thank you so much for coming, Ann-Kristin. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me all right? Yeah, good. So I'm really happy to be here, and this is my first time in Tromsø, so I'm extra happy. And I must say also, I've just been here for a couple of hours, but I'm still really jealous of you. You are so lucky to have so many colleagues and so much going on. So this is a nice place to visit. So I will talk about a project that I spend a lot of time on nowadays. This is work on this particular group of adult learners, those who have not had much schooling in their home country and they are not literate maybe, or can read or write just some. So this is how I organized my talk. So I will say something about these low educated, who are they, what follows being less educated, how does it affect language learning. I will also present or talk, I would like to say something about why it is important that we also study this group, and both from an SLA perspective and also from the perspective of the society. So I will also discuss how to conduct research on language development on this particular group, who have little schooling and not much literacy skills. So, and all this is related to a project which Julia mentioned. This project, here I work with colleagues, Ortega, Helland, and Ann-Kristin, you might know them. So this is a 4-year project funded by the Research Council. We have some PhD students, research assistants, and we have this nice group of people in our advisory board. So who is this population of learners that we can call low educated? So currently we follow about 40 participants. We're still recruiting, and I will present for you 4 of our participants, so you can get an idea of who they are. And so those who participate in our project, they give us consent not only to record their language, but also that we can get information the schools have on them. So that is things like background information about the background, and also the data they collect when they screen the participants for instance, literacy skills. So one of the participants is a female. She is born in 1968 in Congo. She is had many years also in a refugee camp. She is a UN refugee. She came to Norway in winter 2022. She came alone. She had 3 children. She is a so-called right and obligation participant. Rett og plikt-deltaker. And this refers to the Integration Act. I'll just say something about this one. The Integration Act in Norway regulates rights and obligation to language training, social studies, education, social support for immigrants, but it targets only refugees and their family members. It doesn't target, for instance, working migrants. So refugees and their families have the right and obligation to participate in a full-time introductory program, which have different lengths depending on their educational background, for instance. So this program is mandatory. You have to get Norwegian training and social studies, and you have to take part in different types of training. And if you, as a participant, don't follow up, it could have consequences for you. For instance, less social support. So those who participate in our project, they are affected by this law. So back to this woman. So she has only 3 years of schooling in Congo. She comes from a rural area in Congo, and the teacher said she comes from a low technology society. She has no experience with paid work, but has worked as a volunteer in church. She only speaks and understands one language, Kinyarwanda. She has some technical decoding skills. She does not understand the words. Or the teacher told me that she doesn't seem familiar with the concept of reading. The fact, the idea that text and letters have convey an meaning. That's unfamiliar. She has experienced torture. We must assume that she is also traumatized. And she can often not attend class. She's alone in Norway with her children. And we have this male, born in 2000 in Syria, Kurdistan. He has also lived many years in Iraq. He is a refugee. He entered Norway in summer 21. He is also this right and obligation participant. He's alone. He has no family members in Norway. So he's born in 2000. He's just 4 years younger than my oldest, and he has only 1 year of schooling. So it's unfair, but that's how it is. He has worked in the store, and he has also he has Kurmanji, a Kurdish language, as his L1. He only has speaking skills in this language, and he also speaks Arabic. The teacher says that they know that he can also read a bit, and himself says he also reads Sorani a bit. So the teacher say he more Latiniseres, which means that he needs to have extra support and training in the Latin alphabet. So he works each day after school in a restaurant to late night because he has to send money back for family members who are in prison. Teacher says that this negatively affects the language training. He has no choice, but still he attends class every day. Okay, number 3. Female born in 1993 in Somalia. She is here for family reunification, and many of our participants are here because they have been united with their families. She is married to a Somali man who has lived for many years in Norway. He entered Norway early in childhood. So she came in 2018, but she didn't learn Norwegian until early 22 because she had 2 childbirths in Norway. So that means she lost her right to be a right and obligation participant. So instead, she is offered free language training through NAV, Ny Sjanse, New Chance. She has some experience as a hairdresser. She has no schooling at all. She knows only Somali. She can read up to 4-syllable words. The teacher says and understands simple text. So she has some technical decoding skills, and she's often absent from class. The last one, a male. Born in 1978 in Afghanistan, he is also a refugee as the rest of them, right in obligation. He has a family in Norway. So he has 5 years of schooling, but still he can't read or write. Dari is his first language. He describes his school years as a waste of time and a bad memory. He has cracked the reading code in Norwegian. He can read and understand simple text. So as a child, he worked in his father's business, and he has worked as a tailor and so on as an athlete. Right. So these are the people we recruit, more or less. So in the literature, learners with this type of background are recognized as Leslie learners. I'm sure you know this term. So a Leslie learner is characterized as an adult aged 15 plus who is learning an additional language against the backdrop of interrupted formal schooling experience. These learners are often, though not always, immigrant or refugee background individuals developing print literary skills for the first time as adults, but then usually in another language. Yes, so what are the reasons we have for dedicating a project 4 years for this particular group? To start, we need research on this group because they are an under-researched population in SLA research. So in SLA studies, most of the samples, they consist of learners with a rather different starting point than these people have, because they are educated learners and they have often advanced literacy skills. So in other words, we have there exists a sampling bias in SLA research. These are a couple of examples of people who have raised this issue. Tyrone and Bigelow in 2005, who says that who we study determines what we know, which is I agree upon. And they also say that the failure to investigate illiterate learners has resulted in SLA theory that may not account for the full range of contexts in which human beings learn L2s. If theories are to be viable, they must account for widely accepted findings. If accepted findings describe only literate and educated learners, then theory has limited applicability and little value in guiding teachers who work with this group. Okay. So in 2009, Lourdes Ortega, she also raises this issue. She says things like, by confining itself to a narrow slice of diverse experiences of multilingual learning that are possible, SLA researchers create and perpetuate the illusion of tidy categorical kinds of bilingual experience, bilingual competencies, those which are often witnessed under privileged conditions for L2 learning. Yes. And back in 2019, there was this call in language learning for an expansion of the target population in research on L2 acquisition. And they also mentioned this study of Plonsky, who found that in a sample of 600 studies from 6 SLA journals, 67% of all study samples consisted of college or university students. But let's not forget what happened in the 80s in Europe. Then the second language development of working migrants to Europe, they were not probably well educated. They were studied in this big project, the ESF project. And this project have generated insights of development of learner language and learning variety, the basic variety that we still refer to. So we looked at this group in the 80s in a way. And in Norway, in the Norwegian context, you might remember the work of Vigdis Alver and Vigdis Larhaug. They worked with the so-called alpha-innlærere, alpha. So there were people who didn't have literacy skills, but they worked mostly didactic. But this was also in the Norwegian context. Right, so there is some sampling bias, but does it matter? Of course it matters. As we have seen, it's a problem for generalizability of SLA insight. But also, I would say it also may make teacher education less relevant, at least for some groups. And then it may also result in a less relevant language training, at least maybe for the Leslie learners. And I would also say that it could, if you have this narrow sample we look at when we study language development in L2 learning, then it could also make political aims and ambitions less realistic. So almost every student I have, at least, they will be teachers in Norwegian as a second language. And many of them will be teachers for adult immigrants who learn Norwegian. And in the language training centers, the well-educated academic learners is not the majority at all. So these are the textbooks we use, some of them at least, and they build on them a small fraction of the large and homogeneous L2 population. So when this is sort of the case, we risk learn them things that do not fit with the acquisition of phenomenon they need out in the real world afterwards. So for instance, in these books, they say that language aptitude and motivation is it's at least presented as the most important variables to understand variation, individual variation, right? And that works well for understanding variation, I think, for foreign language learning. For instance, for the Norwegian pupils learning German or French in school, I think motivation matters. But I think there are more important variables than motivation when we explain variation among adult learners acquiring an L2 in a second language context, not a foreign language context. I don't know how you feel it, but I also sometimes feel that our politician needs to learn new things. So the politicians to the left here, they need to have the possibility to base their policies on empirical investigations of low-educated immigrants. Because as you see, they very often disagree with teachers and researchers. Not on everything, of course, but very often when it comes to language requirements, as for instance, when we had the new Integration Act, and there was this issue about raising the level or the requirements for Norwegian citizenships from oral A1 to oral B1. Then it was a big discussion. So the aim is that everyone gets at least to B1, right? And then the teachers always protest. We also have these debates. But we can look at the realities. It looks like this. This is what the stats tells us. So if you look on the last one here, red, you see that it's only almost half that can manage B1 oral. And this study, which I have conducted myself, tells us which learner profiles and groups that will have trouble satisfying Norwegian society's ambitious for B1 level for all immigrants. This is what you mentioned, Julia. So in this study, I investigated whether and to what extent over 10,000 immigrants were affected by the background when they took the Norwegian test, not the official test. And this test only measured at A2 level. So I had a dependent variable, which is a 4-graded score, and I only had the written component part of the test. I had all these independent variables, which were collected when sort of self-reporting data. So before they started taking the exam, they gave up this information. So age, yes, prior education, hours of instruction, region, which I had to collapse into a binary variable, Europe or outside Europe, also where you come from, residency, to use outside the classroom, socializing, well, I don't speak is gender, knowledge of English, and there were so many L1s, so I had to do something, so I ended up having a binary variable, Germanic and non-Germanic, because we know that what matters is really how close your language is typologically. So the findings. So 5 variables had a positive effect. Let me see. So having a Germanic L1 background increases the probability of passing all parts of the test. And this is not a shock for us. We knew this, right? And the probability of passing all 3 exam parts gradually increases with more advanced English skills. This is also not a surprise. The analysis also shows that residency affects the test outcome positively, but only after 5 years of residing in Norway. And test takers' prior education levels also influence the test outcome. And gender influences positively, so it's an advantage to be a female test taker. And those affect negatively. Coming from a country outside Europe influences the test score negatively, as does being older. Perhaps most surprising is the fact that then we have a negative association between L2 instruction in Norwegian and test outcome. So the more instruction the learners have received, the lower the chances is for passing the test, right? So let's keep that a secret. There were some who didn't have any effect. But the point is that these findings shows us that Lesser learners, the low educated, not literate, or just have some literary skills, they have less chances of passing the test because they usually not have a Germanic language, no knowledge of English, limited schooling, they migrate from a place outside Europe, and they are the group that receive the most instruction. So that's the lead, right? So these people, they get a lot of hours. They're entitled to more and more instruction up to a point. So that's the explanation I have, at least. So it tells us that these profiles, these 4 people I showed you, they don't have a big chance of getting through the test because of the background, right? Okay, so I hope you agree. It matters. We have to look, we should try to let our samples be more representatives, at least in some of our studies, and cover the acquisition of many different learner populations. So before I start talking about how we conduct research in this group, I will just briefly present some of what have been done on research on less learners and language development. It's not much, and what is done is connected to this forum, which I'm sure you know of, the LESLA forum, which a lot of teachers and researchers in this. So this is a short sum up of what the researchers connected to the LESLA forum have found compared to educated and literate learners. Less learners show slow pace and low levels in the acquisition. They run the risk of stabilizing at an earlier stage. They also have a very strong profile in a way, a weird profile compared to others. So they have very strong oral skills, or not very strong, but they are stronger oral skills than written skills. So the question is why? And those who have worked with this, they say it has to do with metalinguistic awareness, a skill that you acquire when you learn to write and read. And so this is probably the answer. So Kuris is the Dutch researcher who I worked a lot with this group. She said, why should so many unskilled L2 learners display a slow pace of learning and achieve a low proficiency level compared to matched literates from the same background? It's not plausible that they all lack the potential to learn. Many of them simply did not get a chance to attend school. Why is focusing on form using grammatical markers or solving simple syllogisms so difficult? Metalinguistic skills, after all, should not be confused with intelligence or learning attitude. Right, so I give an example from Paris and other people. So studies of syllogism, which is a form of reasoning in which conclusion is drawn from 2 given assumption or premises. This is what we do at school. We do a kind of weird task sometimes, right? And research show that those who lack metalinguistic awareness, they respond differently to these kind of tasks. So, for instance, this task: all women in Makia are married. Fatima is not married. Does Fatima live in Makia? Then research shows that the less learners say things like, I don't know Fatima. We have to ask Fatima. It cannot be that there is a country where all women are married. And this is a sort of common school thing to do, to answer and understand how to respond to these tasks. That's something we learn in school, but they respond differently. And the interpretation is that non-literates tend to base their answer on their own knowledge and experience from the world. So for non-literate adults, language is a referential system and a medium of communication. It's not an object of reflection. So this tells us that there is a connection then between literacy and cognition. And this is from a completely different branch of research. So this is a study that departs from the assumption that learning to read and write have cognitive consequences, like changes in visual perception, logical reasoning, and remembering strategies. And this study compares illiterate adults with literate adults and children with a few years of schooling, and they compare their performance on several neuropsychological testing. And this is the finding. So they find that results indicate a significant educational effort on most of the tests. For some tests, only just 1 or 2 years of formal education may result in a significant difference in test performance. So only a bit of schooling affects cognition. And it's also said that this was true, particularly with regard to language understanding, phonological, verbal fluency, and conceptual abilities. So overall, it found that educational background was actually more important than age. So what these glimpses into research shows us that learning to write and to read have an effect on how we process information. So people who have learned to read and write, they have learned some strategies that lesser learners haven't learned, and this affects the acquisition of an additional language. But we must not forget trauma as a variable in this. So many of the learners in this group, they suffer from and are deeply affected of trauma after war and violence. And we know also that this affects, for instance, like working memory. But this is not our research field, but the participants, some of them who are in our project, they have this, they have been traumatized. This is something we have to take into consideration in the end when we are to explain all this variation. And then these variables come into play. Okay, so these elder learners deserve more attention, but how can we do research in this group? Because it's our experience that not only does non-literates and people with not that much school experience approach tasks differently, they also respond differently as research participants. So this is not easy. I'll just show you what we have promised the Research Council to do. So the overall, the object of research in a way is to find out how adult learners with limited educational backgrounds develop their communicative abilities in Norwegian. Because our project is paid by the Education and Competence Program in the Research Council. So we want to find out, try to find out how the learners develop the skills in the 3 domains of grammar, vocabulary, and pragmatics, and how and to what extent does this development interact in a way. We also want to figure out how and to what extent the composition of the community ability is similar or different among the learners. We have, and we hope to have data to answer this one, number 4, which deals with the dialectal variation. So the participants are all in the official Norwegian language training for adult immigrants. The original criteria was to take in people who had 10 years or less educational background or schooling. So because we were afraid we wouldn't get enough people. So we have changed it somewhat. Now we try to focus on what we call track 1, and I will just explain that to you briefly. So the language training is organized in tracks according to the participants' background, particularly their educational background and to what extent they know English. So if you have no or limited school background, no or limited literacy skills, no knowledge of English, you're a lesser learner, you would be placed on track 1. And the big group is on track 2. They have completed primary school and lower secondary school, can read and write in at least 1 language, and they have some knowledge of English. Track 3 are the participants with an academic background. We lack, first and foremost, research on track 1 participants. We are trying to focus on them. They are beginner learners, 4 data points. We tried to start the first collection or the first data point in week 4 to 6. That was too early. So now we start in week 8. And we collect recruit from 2 different dialectal areas. So in Western Norway and in the east part. So this was the original plan for the methods. Conversations to assess their community abilities, narratives, collaborative tasks to see if they could sort of interact with other L2 learners, and elicitation tasks. So, but it hadn't really gone according to the plan, but this was the plan. I could talk for many hours about the information and consent process. Because these are newcomers to Norway. they have to relate to so many people, a new system, many rights and obligations. And we come in as a new set of people, so it's much happening. So it's important that we cooperate with the teachers and the interpreters, the L1 assistants at school. So the first meeting is very important to recruit them. So we need to spend much time talking to them and make it a good atmosphere. And we only collect oral consent that we record, because there are some that doesn't write the names. Everything happens to the interpreter, which is really important, the L1 assistants. And we also have spent much time and effort and money on making oral instruction in their L1s for all the methods. So whenever they come into us individually, we play off, we start with say things like Arabic, and then we play off, and then it starts, then they understand or recognize what they should do, and then we start. So that's important. Okay, so at the two first data points, we give them a picture. This is picture description. This is also a part of Norskprøven. It's familiar, they do it in class. So this is something they understand. This is not a problem. Now I will show you how this person, what she produces independently when she got this picture at first data point. Yes, so she was pointing at the man making food, la motte, pointing at the child, this is Sita, pointing at the girl reading a book, Lisa, pointing at the boy who writes, Skriva, pointing at the woman talking on the phone, Håland, musiken. That's what she was able to produce the first time we met her. And this took a lot of time and effort on her part. So she struggles forming these sounds, and you don't see it here, but it was a lot of interaction and confirming and yes and repeating. So that's all we got from her on the first data point. She's on end of the scale in a way, but we have several people who respond like this. But I'll show you another person because we have so much variation in the data set. So this is also a female. She is younger. She has 8 years of schooling. This is what she does at the first data point. En familie, far lager mat, mor snakker på telefon, son leser, søstre leser og ser på boken, baby. She asked for the name, for cry. Katt spiser mat, far hjelper mor lage mat. So this is much more language. And it's not only words. She produced this fast and with less effort. So this is the variation. So this is what we get from the picture of this station. For each data point, they have a conversation with us individually. And we have gone through the textbooks they have and looked for what kind of vocabulary can we expect they have, what can they talk about, but we cannot talk about all this. So they don't have language to talk about comparing Norwegian or talk about the future. So what we often end up talking about, and which is a problem, is that we in a way let them introduce themselves because that's familiar. But then we end talking about family and things and the history maybe, which we don't want to elicit information about. So there are obviously some problems talking about country, family. We try to get them to talk more about hobbies, but that's a bit difficult, more like everyday life. What do you do on a regular day? Or what do you do in a weekend? So we try to switch. So what is a common feature in this conversational data is the presence of formulaic sequences, which you know is a phenomenon with very many different names, and there's also really different outlooks on their role in language acquisition. But we haven't done any systematic investigation, so this is maybe still more a feeling with this is something which is quite frequent, I think. So this is how they start. Jeg kommer, country, jeg bor, sometimes they have the preposition, sometimes not, I speak, and so on. So these type of multi-word utterances in the beginning are not representative for the rest of the language they produce. That's why we can assume that they are formulaic. especially not when we ask them to retell. And it's also sometimes really difficult to understand what they try to tell us in the conversations. And there's a lot of negotiation of meaning. So I will show you one conversation, which is the type of conversation that we find a bit difficult, and but it happens. So it's a long one. So L1 speaker says, as we usually do, because it gets them going. Vil du fortelle om deg selv? Jeg, kommer fra Afghanistan. Bergen, pointing, gesture. Ja, jeg, pointing at her wedding ring. Gift, 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 ja, ja. Tre. And then she shows a picture of girls. And then everyone speaker says, tre jenter. To brødre. Mor. And it goes on. So i Bergen. No, Afghanistan. Interrupting the researcher. Stopping with her hand. I Afghanistan, okay, i Afghanistan. Ingen barn i Bergen. So everyone speaker is confused. She points at their wedding ring. Gift. Okay, du gift. Du og mannen bor i Bergen. I Bergen. Og barna i Bergen. Så tre jenter, showing three fingers. To brødre. Ja, nodding. Det er dine barn. No, waving, no. This is not right, right? Dine brødre, og din mor og mamma i Afghanistan. Afghanistan, waving like this. Brødre, and waving. So this is typical that we struggle to understand what's happening and what she tries to say. And sometimes I've spoken with people 3 times, and then suddenly I realize at the third data point what she has been, or he or she has been trying to tell me several times. So finally we get there. But so if we take away all the gesture here, it's not much language left that she produces, really. So we ask ourselves, what kind of data do we get? So can we make a corpus out of this? And this is also about sisters and brothers and family. Right. So we then try to talk about other things. So now I'll just briefly show you how different it could be if we go to the track 2. So in the beginning, we also recruited track 2 people as long as they didn't have more than 10 years education. So this is the first talk with a male. It's so much easier. You don't see the interaction now. I just took show you the language he is able to produce. Jeg heter X, jeg er 25. Jeg kommer i Bergen 2 år. 1 år, jeg er Oslo mottak. Ja, Oslo mottak. Så kommer jeg her i Bergen. Ja, jeg har en familie ikke her, Syria. Jeg nå bor i Bergen. Jeg går i skolen i 9. Den er L1 speaker doesn't understand. Jeg kommer her skole. Jeg, me, pointing at himself. Jeg her. And then the L1 speaker understands, oh, you're new. So it was the difficult vowel here. It means new. But as you see, this is something else you can get from. That's the picture, right? So if you go recruit people on track 1 and try to get their language, they're not able regularly to produce things like that. But some of the young people are. So the age factor is probably something that also affects this. So this is a female. She's younger. This is her second data point when we try to talk of something else than family. So she is asked what she do in the weekend. Jeg står opp, jeg vasker hus, jeg er cooking frokost, cooking rush, we don't know what that is. Jeg spiser frokost, jeg og barn spiser sammen, jeg ser på TV, jeg hører musikk, jeg danser. So you don't see the interaction, but this is what she is able to produce. This is a track 1 participant, only 2 years of schooling. She's quite young, and this is also something I think we will see quite clear afterwards, that track 1 being young is maybe it's easier for them. They are approaching the task differently, perhaps, and they are able to produce more language faster than those we meet who are older. I'm not sure about this yet, but it's a hypothesis at least. So the experience for this type of task. So the picture task isn't really giving us really interesting data at all, because it's a lot of language support. Sometimes we give them the name in Norwegian. The point is that they are comfortable, they feel that they master something, but so we stick to it for 2 data points. It's just sort of a warm-up. And of course, we can see if they have more than one, if there are only one utterance words, or if they have several words in their utterances. So the conversations, we think that it actually shows their communicative competence more or less. We can see what they have of possibilities when it comes to communicate with someone is really willing to understand you, of course, and what are their limitations. And I think they experience it as something that is authentic. This is something they know they have to do in the oral exam at some point. But the problem is that it's a lot of language support, it's a lot of negotiation with meaning, and how successful it is depends on the topic, and it's really difficult to choose the right topic when you meet a new person. So it's a bit tricky. So output is highly topic dependent, and it's a lot of gesture with meaning, and what are we supposed to do with that? We're not gesture researchers, at least not yet. So there is not easy to analyze this, and we're also supposed to make this corpus. Okay, so at all 4 data points, we will show them a clip of Chaplin. This has been used a lot, I'm sure you know it, for instance, in the ESF project. I don't know, now is the time we are pushing some button. It's a silent film, but there is music.
I'm sorry for the Zoom people, but we have to mute you.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, plan didn't work. Okay, let's try again. Sorry. Okay, all right. So yeah. So if I do like this,
Then you need to, you need to.
right?
Yeah. Now
Okay.
it's doing that.
Fine. And they hear us on Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so everyone sees this first clip, and if they do well, we also show them another clip, but many people only see this clip, right? So I thought I should show you what a female born 1966 give us of language 4 times. And I have to say that some of the tech runners, they just do like this when we show them this in there. So a few, not many, they just, no, not a chance. And the strategy is here to, okay, if we do like this, we don't leave it. We try to do it together. But we try to let everyone talk without any language support in this part. We try to keep this as clean as possible. But when they're finished, we sometimes talk to them about what they've seen. So everyone can go out with, not feeling so low after this one. So she says, first time, this. Hon, ja, hon, politik. That's all we got. So not much. I have done this before on track 3, and it's completely different, even though they have only done Norwegian for 2 months. This is in the second point, en dame, sultan, trist, kaldt, handhjelp, endre, politi, andre politi. It's more, something happens. This is the third one, brød, dame sultan, dame brød, dame ser, bakere brød, dame løper, mann, then she says something in Turkish, politi, amma, kam, it's difficult to hear. I wonder if it's come or Turkish. Jeg jobber, jeg, nei, ei dame ser ut baker. So it develops slowly. You can see it, the utterances are longer. This is the fourth time, and then she started talking immediately when I played the film. And she was more eager. So hun trist, kanskje sulten, hun stjal en brød, kvinne andre dame ser, hun protestor, kommer politi, mann sa jeg, mannen protestor. So this is what she gives us, and then we sort of finish. This is what this 10 months or 11 months she learned Norwegian. That's how far she come when we showed her this one. So the experience is that we only need to show them really short clips, not that much, only a scene at a time, and we have to differentiate how much we show them. Okay, I'm soon finished. We tried elicitation. We really wanted to have an elicitation task in order to get enough data and study specific language structures. Maybe you know this test. This was Linda Emerson and Gujord who made once upon a time. So the participants looks at the screen and they get these pictures. The researchers say, dette kalles hatt. Hva ser du på bildet? The response is supposed to be, jeg ser en grønn hatt og en oransje hatt. And something disappears, and researchers say, hva forsvant? And it's supposed to say, den oransje hatten forsvant. Well, this didn't work at all. It works at track 2, not with track 1. They don't know the colors. And so we try to, and sometimes we try to learn them the colors, and even at the last data point, some of them didn't know the colors still. So they spent so much effort and thinking of the colors and thinking, what am I doing? It just was really weird, even though we gave them instructions in the language. This was not working. We tried to practice the colors, we tried to give them much language support, then we sort of, that's no point, then we primed them. So we tried to shorten it down and see if it didn't work. So we leave it for now. For collaboration, that's also difficult. It's difficult for them to collaborate and use the language. So we tried things like this. They got these pictures, they first described them on their own and to each other, and they together were supposed to pick piece the story together. And you think, no, this is easy, but it's not easy actually, because of the cat. This was fun, they liked it, but they just pointed, they had so many strategies for avoiding using Norwegian together. We also tried to match them 2 and 2 and talk together. It works a bit better, but it's difficult. We have tried to make our own collaboration tasks. This is something Linda has been doing. It could look like an elicitation task, but it was supposed to be a collaboration task. I think I've just jumped over this. This was also difficult. It worked at track 2, not at track 1. Difficult to understand and process what we do. We had also a video showing 2 people playing. They lack the vocabulary and they don't understand what's going on and why they do it in a way. So we haven't given up on this one. So we will redesign and try it again. So we really want to have some kind of activity that we can make them work together and listen when they use the L2 together. We have sometimes it might work, but all in all, they just use their fingers. Okay, so the conclusion is that this is challenging. It's a challenging project. I think I've never learned so much. But still, it's important to document the Norwegian development and skills of this group. The participants need so much support from us. We are sort of in a different positions as researchers. We must make an effort that they feel comfortable, because they're a bit skeptical in the beginning. They are sort of they are vulnerable. They have not much language, and we ask them to do a lot of things. It's so much individual variation, and we think that well, we worry sometimes. I worry. Do we have enough data? But this is probably how it is in this group. But it's important, it's fun, and we'll keep going, and I'm optimistic. Thank you for your attention.
Who was first?
Maybe
just
she was first. Okay. Yes.
Just had an information question about the Norwegian classes that these are going to. Are they